So today, we're going to piece together the life of a woman who might seem, ordinary at first glance. But when you start digging through the records and the letters, you uncover this remarkable story of resilience and reinvention that spans two whole continents. This is the life of Ellen Heaven.
And her story is it's one of these incredible transformations. We start with a young nursemaid, stuck in the rigid world of Victorian England, and we're going to follow her as she travels across the globe to become a pioneer, literally carving out a life for herself on the Australian frontier.
But it's also a story, and this is important, that's marked by some really profound loss. We see her as a wife and a mother, building a family from scratch, only to have that entire world shattered by a tragedy that would force her to find a kind of strength she probably never knew she had. And what we end up with is this picture of a mother who, truly against all odds, just forges a life completely on her own terms. And she leaves behind a legacy that's as complex as it is, well, inspiring. And you know what's so fascinating? The very first clue to her life of constant change and adaptation is right there in her own name. A name that, as it turns out, was never quite consistent.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. We're in Gloucestershire, England, where Ellen Heaven was born in 1855 to a carpenter and his wife. But from the get-go, her identity seems to be a little fluid.
And her middle name? It's the perfect example of what I'm talking about. It just keeps shifting across all the official documents. Her civil birth record calls her Justina. Then, at her church baptism, it's Eugenia. And by the time she gets married, it's morphed into Eutania. It's just this amazing metaphor for a woman who would have to constantly adapt and redefine herself her whole life. So, in 1875, Ellen marries a local guy, a nurseryman named William Burgess. But this wasn't your typical settle-down kind of marriage. Not at all. Just 1 month after their wedding, they make this huge, life-altering decision to emigrate to South Australia. Just look at this contrast. It shows the incredible leap she was taking. On one side, you have her past, a nursemaid in the very imposing Gloucester Lunatic Asylum. And on the other, her future, a passenger on an immigrant ship heading to a whole new world. It was a total pivot from a difficult, structured past to a future that was a complete unknown. And this wasn't just some whim, They were actually part of a much bigger historical wave. The South Australian government was actively trying to recruit gardeners, just like her husband William, and they were offering free passage to anyone who would come and help build a brand new forestry industry from the ground up. So when they get to Australia, they don't head for the city. Nope, they go straight for the bush, for these remote forest reserves where they'd start to build their family and an entirely new life, completely from scratch. So their life was all about moving around, just following the work. And right away, they face this awful hardship. Their first child is born and then dies. Then they move to Werribar Forest, and their family starts to grow inside this little cottage. Finally, they transfer to Mount Brown, and 5 more kids are born. By 1889, Ellen is running this bustling household way out on the frontier. So, after more than a decade of building this life, everything just comes to a screeching, devastating halt. The family is hit by a tragedy that would totally shatter Ellen's world and force her down a new and much, much harder path. The year is 1891. Just think about that. A single year that would completely redefine her entire life. So first, in June, her 11-year-old daughter Elizabeth dies. Then, just 2 months later, her husband William, he's only 39, dies from influenza. In the space of just a few weeks, Ellen is left a widow with 7 kids still to raise, and the youngest is only 2 years old. And a local newspaper really gives you a sense of the scale of this loss. It says his funeral was one of the biggest ever seen in the area, with up to 1,000 people there. This tells you just how respected he was in the community, and wow, how public and overwhelming her grief must have been. But here's the thing about Ellen. She doesn't crumble. Not even close. In this incredible show of resilience, she actually remarries and moves her entire family clear across the continent to Western Australia, chasing the gold rush and the promise of another fresh start. And it's here that a whole new side of Ellen starts to emerge. Now signing her name Ellen U. Graham, she starts writing these letters to the newspaper editor. In this one, she argues really forcefully against pubs being open on Sundays, calling them a nuisance.
She is not just a pioneer's wife anymore. She has a public voice, and she is absolutely not afraid to use it.
Okay, here's another one. She writes in to complain about what she calls a most disgraceful incident on a train where some guy got hit with a thrown tomato. She demands better security, and she is just outraged. This just shows a woman with such a strong sense of what's right and wrong, and yeah, some very forthright opinions. Well, by 1909, she's a widow all over again. And what does she do? She reinvents herself. Again. Ellen applies for a license to run a 7-bedroom boarding house. You have to remember, at a time when the options for women were so limited, she becomes a business owner, providing for herself. So in her later years, Ellen is the absolute, undisputed head of this big, sprawling family. And the final documents she leaves behind, they give us one last, really fascinating glimpse into her powerful character.
Just look at this incredible family portrait. It shows Ellen as the matriarch, surrounded by her children around 1915. Her son, Alan, the one seated in his uniform, he actually served at Gallipoli and suffered from shell shock. Suddenly, her family's story is tangled up with these massive world events.
And this is her final word. It's her handwritten will from 1931. Just the document itself, in her own handwriting, it just screams control. It shows a woman who is clear-minded and making her own decisions, right up to the very end. And the details in it are just, wow, they're striking. She demands the plainest possible funeral. No flowers, no fuss. She leaves a bigger share of her estate to her son Alan, the war veteran. And then you get this final mystery. 2 of her other sons, Fred and Archie, are cut out of the will completely. No reason given. It's just such a final, decisive move from a woman who, you can tell, lived her entire life on her own terms. So when you look back at her whole journey, from nursemaid to pioneer, from widow to businesswoman, from England to the Australian frontier, Ellen's life was anything but ordinary. Her story is this incredible lens through which we can see a whole era of migration, of hardship, of immense social change. And it really makes you wonder, right? How many other amazing stories are just hiding in plain sight, tucked away in the ordinary lives of the past?